Pick a card, any card. Was your card arts? Well, if so, then I have just the servant for you. Hello everyone, Soberoni of G&A Reviews here, with a servant spotlight for the illusionist who doesn't need any magic to enchant you, Summer Charlotte. We'll be examining her stats and skills, as well as going over pointers on how to utilize her effectively, and an overall grade comparing her to how she stacks up to the other 4-star servants. So if you're ready to pull an SR out of a hat, then hit that like button, subscribe, and ring my bell so you can catch all of these spotlight videos as they go up, and you can help out the channel. And now, on to Charlotte's stats. Charlotte has a max HP of 11,882 and a max attack of 8,147, which becomes 7,575 due to her caster class modifier. Charlotte doesn't have amazing stats even for a caster, with both her HP and attack being below average for her class. Her HP is solid for an SR overall, but her attack stat is abysmal for her rarity. When it comes to her command cards, she has 3 hits on her quick card, 3 hits on her arts, 3 hits on her buster, and 4 hits on her extra card. She has an NP gain rate of 0.53% and a star rate of 10.7%. Her NP gain is only average, but she does have 3 arts cards to compensate, while unfortunately she lacks any real star generating due to only having 1 quick card. As far as stats go, Charlotte's range from terrible to average across the board, which is not especially good for an offensive servant. Taking a look at her skills, Charlotte's first skill is Illusionist False, rank C+. This skill increases her own arts card effectiveness for 3 turns between 20 and 30% depending on level, and it also inflicts confusion on all enemies for 3 turns and grants the party 1 hit of evasion. Her second skill is Ludicrous Show Planning, rank A. This skill has between a 50 and 100% chance to skill seal an enemy for 1 turn, and it also generates between 5 and 10 crit stars every turn, both of these effects depending on level. And finally, it also increases the party's NP damage by 20% for 3 turns. Charlotte's last skill is Angel of Tricks, rank EX. This skill charges her own NP gauge between 20 and 30%, as well as an ally's NP gauge by the same amount, this effect depending on level. Moving on to her passives, Charlotte has Magic Showfield, rank EX, which increases her arch card effectiveness by 5% and the arch card crit damage by 10%, and she has Magic Goods Create, rank C+, which increases her own debuff success rate by 6% and her star generating by 10%. Moving on to her deck and Noble Phantasm, Charlotte has an Arts deck with Quick, Arts Buster, and an Arts Noble Phantasm. Her Noble Phantasm is La Furie du Net, which is a single target arch attack that deals damage to 1 enemy with a damage modifier between 900 and 1500% depending on NP level. It also generates 20 crit stars and deals extra damage to skill sealed enemies with a damage modifier between 150 and 200% depending on overcharge. Unfortunately, Charlotte's Ascension mat requirements are nowhere near as lenient as Da Vinci or even Anastasia's. In fact, they are downright brutal. For level Ascension, she's going to need 6 pages, 8 seashells, 11 snake jewels, and 6 lamps. But where things really take a turn are for her skills. For her skill Ascension, she's going to need 12 seashells, 12 pages, 60 bullets, and 60 spinal fluid per skill. Yikes. Charlotte is one of the most interesting characters in FGO, especially as a choice for Summer, because she's probably one of the only characters who can be considered both a fan favorite or completely forgettable depending on who you're asking. But for you Charlotte loyalists out there, you should be very pleased, because despite her stats, Summer Charlotte is actually very strong. I always say that stats don't determine the servant, and that's especially the case here, because while Charlotte is subpar statistically across the board, she more than makes up for it with her incredible skill set. First up, she has Illusionist, which gives her a 30% arts buff for herself, as well as a party-wide evasion, and it debuffs all of the enemies with Confusion. Confusion is an interesting debuff. Much like Terror, every turn it has a 30% chance to activate on an enemy and inflict the debuff. In this case, it inflicts Skill Seal instead of Stun though, which normally would make it worse than Terror, but in Charlotte's case, this works exceptionally well with her gimmick. More importantly though, the 30% arts buff does help bolster both Charlotte's NP gain and her overall damage potential, since the majority of her deck is comprised of arts cards, while the Harp of Healing like Evasion makes for an excellent support skill in emergency situations to keep the party alive. Keeping on the theme of skill sealing though, Charlotte also has Ludicrous Show Planning, a single target skill seal that also generates crit stars and buffs the party's NP damage by 20%. This skill is yet another source of skill seal for Charlotte, which more than anything else, gives her an opportunity for buffing her own NP damage on top of additional utility. The NP buff part of the skill is also party-wide for 3 turns, so it's a nice buff that stacks really well with her other card buff. Between the arts buff and this NP damage buff, Charlotte actually has some high damage NP steroids for a caster. And finally, for easier access to that devastating Noble Phantasm, Charlotte has Angel of Tricks. This skill charges an ally's NP gauge by 30% and then charges Charlotte's NP by 30%. This is an extremely versatile skill because not only does it allow Charlotte to act as an NP battery for another servant, helping them loop or get off a turn 1 Noble Phantasm, but it also works on Charlotte herself, which makes this effectively a 60% NP charge. In other words, it's a 60% NP battery that you can also split between Charlotte and someone else. And it's only on a 6-turn cooldown, so that's pretty damn amazing. And it's for this reason that you should level it first, followed by Illusionist for that arts buff, and then Show Planning last since it's a little bit more situational. Mana loading and extra card damage are also worthy pickups for append skills. Charlotte's Noble Phantasm is a single target arts attack that generates 20 crit stars and deals a boatload of bonus damage to enemies who have Skill Seal. And it all comes full circle. Yes, this is why Skill Seal is such an important skill for Charlotte. It basically acts as an NP buff enabler, kind of like how Yang deals more damage to burned enemies. Charlotte's entire game plan revolves around inflicting enemies with Skill Seal so that she can absolutely body them with her Noble Phantasm. And luckily for her, she has 2 sources of it, so it isn't difficult for her to do. The additional damage modifier from her NP on sealed enemies is huge and more than makes up for her otherwise lacking offensive stats. And because Charlotte has a triple arts deck and an arts buff as well as a 60% charge skill, it's very easy for her to spam out her Noble Phantasm and loop it with the right supports. So if you're really lucky, you can sometimes Skill Seal an enemy with Show Planning and then NP them for massive damage, only to have Confusion proc on the following turn and then do another big NP for even more follow-up damage. And while yes, being the best offensive caster is kind of like being the tallest kid in kindergarten, it is worth mentioning that Charlotte does have exceptional damage output against skill sealed enemies, almost rivaling even Sanzo. Damage isn't all Charlotte is good for either. She provides a good amount of buffing and utility in the off support role as well. She can back up a stronger DPS by providing them with additional NP damage, good NP charge, and a lot of crit stars from both her NP and her second skill. Skill Seal can also be a strong stall debuff in some fights, provided that the enemy is susceptible to it. And as you've probably guessed several minutes ago, that is by far Charlotte's biggest weakness. She heavily relies on her Skill Seal to deal nearly all of her damage, and many bosses will either be immune to it or highly resistant. Not to mention that Confusion is an extremely RNG dependent way of applying the debuff as well. If Charlotte isn't able to seal a boss, then she provides little more than a couple of mediocre buffs and no real damage. Thankfully though, there are several servants who can help Charlotte out with this issue. You'll primarily want to pair Charlotte up with servants who can either lower enemy debuff resist, inflict Skill Seal, or buff her damage. With that in mind, Murasaki Rider, Tamamo, Matahari, and William Tell are all excellent choices for Charlotte, depending on the situation. Tamamo is just a great arts buffer who can also help with stalling out enemies. Murasaki Rider seems custom made to work with Charlotte, since she not only reduces enemy debuff resist, but can also skill seal enemies herself, while softening them up with arch resist and defense down debuffs. If you don't have Murasaki, then Matahari actually works extremely well in a similar role, so she's your main free-to-play option. And as a support, Charlotte and Tell synergize real well, since both can use Skill Seal, and Charlotte can easily feed him crit stars for maximizing his burst damage. Charlotte's Bond CE is Illusion for You. It increases the party's damage against skill sealed enemies by 30%. This has obvious synergy with Charlotte and is quite unique, but it's only really useful as a pure support, since the lack of attack stats will hurt Charlotte's damage more than the buff helps. Instead, give Charlotte CEs that bolster her NP damage, like Black Grail, Royal Icing, and Ocean Flyer. You can also give her Record Holder to help increase the odds of inflicting Skill Seal. In the future, Winds of Spring has excellent challenge quest viability on her, since it not only increases arts and NP damage, but also gives Invincibility Pierce and full attack stats. And Evasion Pierce is something crucial that Charlotte lacks a bit of in her kit. As for command codes, there aren't many that directly help her, but I do like Goodnight V because it removes a crit buff from an enemy and then inflicts arch resist down on them. Crit buffs are extremely common on enemies, so this is an easy condition to satisfy, especially in boss fights, and it gives Charlotte just a little bit of extra utility. Overall, my opinion on caster Charlotte is that she's very strong under the right conditions. When she's facing enemies who are susceptible to Skill Seal, then she's capable of dishing out tons of damage, competing with even the SSR casters. And she's a strong off support who can provide good buffs and damage to the team, as well as a highly versatile NP charge. The problem comes when she isn't able to get her skill seal off, because without it, her damage and consistency is greatly hindered. And despite being a strong caster DPS, there are simply way better offensive options outside of the caster class. So all in all, Charlotte gets a B+ from me. I think that under the right circumstances, Charlotte could be as high as an A, but being so overly dependent on landing debuffs really hurts her. If you build around that flaw though, she can be very powerful, especially for a 4-star. And those are my thoughts on Charlotte. The battle for single target art supremacy between her and Anna this summer is very close, but ultimately I do give a slight advantage to Anna since she doesn't have to depend as much on RNG. But it could also just be my Archer bias talking. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and consider subscribing if you really enjoyed the video. Join the party over in our Discord, chill with us on Twitch, and follow us on Twitter, all linked in the description down below. And I'll see you all in the next Servant Spotlight. Sobroni out. Later.